All right. Well, welcome everybody to the 1016 Man podcast. And I just wanted to take a second, being that this is the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, just to remember the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives at that time. All right. Thank you. And it's a good reminder, really, that there are men and women who have to take up arms to fight and protect those either locally or abroad. And we have a guest today who embodies that, embodies the 1016 man idea. He embodies the sheepdog idea, and we will get more into that as well. So Mike Baldwin is my guest today, and Mike has spent over 20 years as a distinguished law enforcement officer in Arizona. And he has served as patrol officer, field training officer, SWAT operator, sergeant, and lead detective in Major Felons Unit. And as a detective, Mike honed his craft and became arguably his department's best interviewer and gained admissions and confessions from suspects who committed a varied amount of crimes. And over the years, he's received multiple department awards, citations of outstanding police work, and is respected by his peers. He serves as an example and a mentor to several young detectives and has found that experience to be rewarding. He's a sheepdog in his church. He has recently joined Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman and with the Grossman On Truth. And he's also a devoted husband, father, and Christian man who seeks to honor God in all that he does. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Martin. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're doing and this mission, this 1016 man. I'm wearing the shirt today, so
Oh, yeah, right on.
thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it got to you. It looks a little better on you than it does on me, sir. So explain to for me and the listeners how you got your start in law enforcement, or you can go back a little bit to kind of bring us up to speed with all that.
Okay, well, um, out of college, I was a teacher and a high school basketball coach. I had grown up in a Christian family, and so I'd always respected law enforcement and what they did for the community. Matter of fact, one of the guys that I coached with, I coached the guys' varsity team. He coached the girls' varsity team. He was a Phoenix police officer for many years, and so I respected him. And then some things changed at the school where we were at, and it was a private school. And one thing led to another. Um, I never had this huge desire to be a police officer, but the door was opened. And so when God gives you and presents you an open door, you can do a couple different things. One thing I did is step through it and said, okay, let me try this. And so I started applying at multiple agencies in the Valley. In Arizona, it was very competitive at the time. Hundreds of people would show up at a testing, and they were looking just for a few slots. And initially, I got picked up by the Chandler Police Department on the east side of Phoenix and went through the academy with them. And then I lateraled to the west side of Phoenix, which was closer to my home. And I spent 21 years at the Surprise Police Department.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, I also was a teacher. Before becoming a firefighter, I was a middle school math teacher and coached some sports as well. And now I do peewees and little league and things like that in our area as well.
Yeah, I think sports are a great thing, especially if done right. And they can teach you so many things about life. They can teach you about winning and losing and camaraderie, teamwork, getting up when you're knocked down. All those things are valuable lessons.
Oh yeah, it's a really a great vessel for teaching character if if you step into it for that reason. I mean obviously we're teaching the kids skills and we're striving to win, but not at the sake of character, right?
Yeah, not at all costs.
Yeah, correct. You said something that I think is important to flesh out a little bit for those raising young boys, and that was your relationship to God as it was um, in seeking that job. You said, there was when a God opens a door, you step through it. So, what does that look like practically? Because I think, um, I hear some people say, well, I'm waiting to hear from God, and some people who just step forward. And so, what does that look like, or what did it look like for you?
Yeah, so it'd be great if God spoke to us audibly and or wrote something in the sky saying, "Hey, do this." But I think closed doors are an answer as well. So sometimes when you pray and you're asking God for His will and His direction, He answers you by closing some doors, and then He opens doors. And so as long as the door is open, why not continue to explore it? Asking, you know, God for his direction and helping you have spiritual eyes, not just to seek what you want, but to seek what he wants. And so we can try to force what we want, and it doesn't always work out the way, we had hoped it would. But if we follow his plan, because I've learned over my career here that his ways are not my ways and his thoughts are not my thoughts. And but if you're looking with spiritual eyes and you're talking to people asking for guidance and wisdom, God will show you what he wants you to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of, and I can't remember exactly which passage it is, but it says, a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. So what I'm hearing is that, you're moving forward with something because that door hasn't closed. And if it,
Yep.
and if it continues to stay open and, you're applying against these hundreds of people, um, that door stayed open, it sounds like.
Yeah, it did. And so then uh, you're looking for his timing and for the right place. Same thing now in my current position, now that I've retired from the police department. I had some ideas on what I would want to do after. Um, and I applied at all kinds of places, got my master's degree, and said, okay, this is what I'd like to do. But those jobs didn't materialize. And so, again, same thing. I'm asking God for his will and for an open door, in this position with Lieutenant Colonel Grossman opened up. And it was a little scary. It was out of my comfort zone. It was something different. It wasn't what I had envisioned initially. But just like I would tell my children, and I have two children, they're twins and young adults. My son's going to get married here in 1 week, so we're excited for that. But I would tell them to pray for God's will and direction. But when he gives you an open door, you can stand in the threshold and say, Lord, show me, or you can take that step of faith. And faith sometimes is scary.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's scary. So, and in your, and I love hearing that you're still grounded in the Lord because you were in your position. I would imagine that you're pressed up against darkness, that a lot of us have not seen, when you're talking about being a detective, that you are a SWAT operator, you are, a part of a felons unit. I mean, can you kind of talk about what allows you to maintain that light?
Yeah, so there's a lot to that question. And just to paint a picture for your listeners, there's a lot of cop shows on TV, and a lot of times they show uh, a very dysfunctional police officer, and he's out on a vengeance mission. Somebody did him wrong, and so now we're rooting for him, to go get vengeance on everybody. Well, that's not exactly accurate in real life, but the evil that you see, the evil that I saw, um, talking to people in the interview room, you can look in their eyes, and some people say the eyes are the window to the soul, and you can see some. They're like, man, this guy has no hope. He is so far gone. And then there's other people. You're like, there's hope for this person. Um, Maybe because they're not as evil, and we kind of justify it based on the crimes that they commit. But I grew up in a Christian home, and so I did not see some of the things related to drug use, violence, um, domestic violence, all those things until I became a police officer. And then you walk into that, and to be a good police officer, to be a good detective, you got to be close to the dirt, so to
Mm,
speak, but not participate in it. And so
yeah.
you have to know where the line is. And unfortunately, some guys, have crossed over the line, and so you have to maintain your bearing, and you do that with the Lord's help and His uh, guiding you. But I took my job very seriously. I took an oath, and just kind of how I was raised, you don't take an oath lightly. And I was going to do the best job that I could for the victims. I was going to try to get justice for all. That didn't always happen. Things didn't always work out my way, but I was a competitor. And from my sports days, um, I treated my job like a game, and we're playing 4 quarters. You might win the first couple rounds or a boxing match, but I'm playing this career for 20 years, and I'm going to get you. And typically, once I set my sights on somebody, they usually got.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, I just think about that experience of having rubbed shoulders with these people, having stared into their eyes and like you say, into their soul a little bit. You, did you see a lot of commonalities with these, with criminals, and maybe you could speak to their background or the kind of, um, personalities or traits that they showed?
Yeah, I think so. Not to put everybody into the same box. There are some commonalities, and it seemed that most of the criminals, the people that I dealt with, um, either were from a broken home. They certainly abused drugs at some point along the way, and that kind of got them on a path. Not everybody was a drug user, but most
Sure.
were, medicating with alcohol, drugs, just basically seeking all the pleasures of this world, trying to find happiness, not getting it, but now you're craving the drug. You're willing to do whatever is necessary, committing crimes to get it. Most of the violent crimes were drug related, people trying to get money, uh, a drug deal gone bad, that type of thing. Very few people in society are just going out, you know, somebody's just a sociopath wanting to kill somebody. There are some of those people, but very few. But one of the common denominators that I saw, these folks made excuses all the time. They had to blame somebody for who they were instead of um, taking responsibility for themselves. And so, as a parent, we're teaching our children, hey, if you are do something wrong, you might be punished. But I want you to tell the truth, and I want you to accept responsibility. So most of the people that I dealt with, and that's what the interview and the interrogation is all about. You're doing this dance for an hour, hour and a half of them. Oh, I was there, but I wasn't right there. It was somebody else that did it. There's somebody else that looks just like me, and you're defeating all these excuses. And so, yeah, very few did you get somebody in the interview room that said, "Yeah, it was me. It was my fault." I mean, that was rare. And when that happened, I almost stopped the interview and said, "Wow, thank you for saying that. You're still going to face consequences, but maybe not as tough, because I'll write in my report that this person showed some humility and accepted responsibility for what they did, and we'll leave it up to a judge after that."
Yeah. Yeah, I thank you very much for pointing that out. It's important to me and important for the guests to hear that, how we raise our boys, our kids, is very important, and the things that we instill are very important. And keeping away from drugs, and for parents who are thinking that, taking marriage, not taking marriage seriously, or getting into a relationship that is above their commitment level, right? And now you have kids that you are not ready to take care of or not ready to guide, and so you end up with a fatherless home, or and our kids are kind of left to seek those pleasures you're talking about.
Yeah, and the reality is, I used to get so upset and so mad at these people for not taking responsibilities, living just reckless lives. Um, they're seeking drugs. They're out in a gang or whatever at, a 30-year-old man still in a gang. You're like, give me a break. And their kids are staying with their mom or dad, or some are in foster, and they still want to claim that they're such a good parent. And I'm like, you're not a good parent. You're a horrific example. And they would get all upset and mad about that, but they couldn't see reality. And I feel bad for the kids that grow up in that type of environment, because you're like, what chance do they have? At the same time, God used those type of things in my life over time. It didn't happen right away, but to develop some level of empathy for them, going, man, I hate what they did, but I don't hate them as a person. If it wasn't for God's grace, maybe I would be in that situation. Maybe I would be in a broken home. And if I were, would I be using drugs? And would I be, behind bars? And so I'm very thankful um, that I didn't have those experiences. But because the oath that I took, I had a job to do for my victims. Um, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And even if it meant, sending this person to prison.
Yeah. So I'm not asking for verbatim here, but you've mentioned your oath a couple of times. Can you explain what that oath is?
Yeah, so it might be a little different from state to state, but basically, you graduate from the police academy, and on graduation night, you raise your right hand and you swear to the Constitution of the United States. You swear that you are going to protect the citizens of whatever state that you live in, and uphold the laws of the land, basically. And what I'm fearful of is we're in a generation right now, certainly the last 2 or 3 years, where those lines have really been blurred, and evil has been called good and good has been called evil. So I'm thinking to myself, what about these police officers that got into this job for the right reasons, but now they're being handcuffed? They're not allowed to do their job. I mean, you can watch the news depending on what political affiliation you are, and you can see uh, cities that have allowed homelessness and drug use right in the middle of the street, and officers are doing nothing. And I'm like, well, on my watch, we were going to do something. And I think maybe sometimes it got me sideways with my administration, because maybe they didn't take the oath as serious as I did. But I also realized that I worked for a higher calling. I wasn't working for the chief of police, I was working
Hmm.
for my Heavenly Father. And one day, who knows when that's going to be, but when I stand before Him, I want to hear Him say, well done. Uh, he doesn't, the standard is perfection, even though I know we can't get there. But I do want to hear Him say, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah. And um, boy, there's a fine line there, right? Between, because God calls us to serve those who we don't agree with, who are in leadership, but also calls us to, in for his glory and his kingdom, to sometimes step outside of that. Are there times that you were in a predicament where you knew you were doing what's right and you were still punished for that, or
I
and maybe
kind of,
not?
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of laugh because, I mean, I feel like I led the Department in Internal Affairs investigations. Um, And the majority of those complaints were internal. They weren't from citizens complaining on me that I, did something wrong or treated them poorly. It was administrators who were weak and I don't know, maybe thought that I was trying to get one up on them. I have no idea. But one in particular, um, I was looking for a suspect who was out committing all kinds of crimes and violent crimes. And uh, I had a lieutenant that said, stop looking for him. I explained that I got him cornered in a house. I wanted the SWAT team out there. And I was interviewing people on the street that said, "Hey, Baldwin, you better find this guy or he's going to kill somebody." And she said no. And I went to her office immediately and said, "Ma'am, he's going to kill somebody. That's how violent he is. I can see that." And a week later, he did do a drive-by shooting and killed an innocent woman. So I felt vindicated. But throughout this whole process, this lieutenant and another commander didn't like how I was getting my information from people on
Mm-hmm.
the street, basically trading information, small petty arrests. I would sometimes trade for information on a bigger fish, and this guy was actually going to kill somebody, and it was proven. And so I was getting in the process of being demoted and having my rank taken away from me. And I'm like, Lord, I know I'm doing the right thing for the right reason, and I don't understand this, but I think that someday you will make it right and I will be reinstated and, no harm, no foul. And I'll get back pay and all that. Well, that never happened. And the Lord never answered that prayer. But what he did was he used that difficult situation to move me into investigations. And that's where, I really flourished and um, earned my reputation as a police officer. And there was one more instance, and it was late in my career where I felt like I did above and beyond what I should have, and I still got in trouble for it. It was a suicide scene, and it was an elderly gentleman who committed suicide in front of his wife, and it was late, and it was the night before a holiday, and I went to the scene. Um, One of the sergeants goes, "Hey, we have this new officer here. Could you kind of show him, walk him through the scene and show him things that you're looking for in a death investigation?" So I did that. That wasn't something that I had to do. So I went above and beyond there. And then uh, the lady left. We got her into a hotel for that night. The medical examiner came and we continued our investigation. Then they removed the body. And typically we secure the house and leave. And I told the patrol officers that were still on scene with me, we're going to clean up this mess, this bloody mess that's on the living room floor. So I cut out some carpet and we got a mop bucket and some bleach and so forth and cleaned this area up. And the patrol guys were saying, "This isn't our responsibility. We don't have to do this." And I said, "No, we don't have to, but this is what we're going to do for this elderly woman." And the next day, it was a Thanksgiving day. I went back out to her house at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, left my Thanksgiving dinner, and spent some time with her. I had a Diet Coke with her at her kitchen table, answered some questions for her on what to do next in life. And she was so upset and so scared that somebody she had lived with for so many years is now immediately gone. She had tons, or he had tons of ammunition and guns around the house, and she didn't know what to do with the ammunition. And I suggested, well, you could donate it to the police department. Our SWAT team will shoot it and stuff like that. And so she thought that was a good idea and gave her permission. So I went and logged all that ammunition into our evidence of safekeeping. And to make a long story short, the estranged family called the police department up and made a complaint. They were saying that this woman probably killed her husband, and Then they found out that we had taken some of the ammo out of the house, and they said we didn't have permission to do that. And so this lieutenant that I had, who was so weak he couldn't even get himself out of a wet paper bag, um, he starts some internal investigation. And then the commander, who is also a complete joke at the time and not a fan of mine, saw this as an opportunity to go, oh, Detective Baldwin did an incomplete investigation. Well, when the story comes out and I'm in an internal affairs investigation for neglect of duty for doing an incomplete investigation, they find out that I went above and beyond. I cleaned up the scene that I didn't have to do. I trained another young patrol officer that night, which wasn't my job to do. I went back out the next day to assist a citizen. One of the lieutenants goes, "Why did you do that? That's not in your job description." I said, "Well, it's in the mission statement of our department that we're going to provide excellent customer service." And that's what I was doing. And then I said, I don't know, maybe it was just me, but I was thinking of my own mom who's alone. My father is now in heaven. What if this would happen to her? Wouldn't it be nice that somebody gave her enough time and compassion, customer service to help her through this difficult time? So it's those type of things that are so frustrating because it's like, don't you guys see what I'm trying to do for my community? And I'm sorry if it didn't, comply with everything that you wanted, but you've promoted so quickly along your career. Maybe they do that in the police or the fire department too. Um, Guys can't wait to get promoted, and the second the next job is open, they promote, and it's like you don't even know how to do your own job of being a good police officer first, but yet you want to be a sergeant, a lieutenant, a commander, assistant chief, and you've never even done the job. But yeah, you make more money and you make stupid decisions.
Yes. I think that um, he, I don't want to plead the fifth on that one. I'm still
Go ahead.
working. But no, it's all right. No, but it's true. It's true that that does happen within the fire organization as well, for sure. I think it's, I love that you have come full circle and that you started off by talking about, teaching character to athletes, and that was an important piece of it. And then you come back later in your career and you honor that. You're not a hypocrite to that, and you do it there was a cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
To showing character, and you showed a lot of resilience through those times. And the opposing force seemed to be as you described, a weakness of character, and so where do you get that strength? Where do you yeah, I mean, what is that foundation for your strength and your resiliency and courage to do that? Because I mean, you're around a lot of, probably a lot of really strong guys who aren't afraid to go through a door, but that when it comes to standing up for and doing the right thing, that's at those moments when a lot of times they're weak.
Yeah, my mind's racing to a couple different things.
Yeah.
Number one is I grew up with a strong work ethic. My dad basically said, cut the word quit out of the dictionary. We're not using that in this family. And so I coached that way. And, I mean, we work so hard in sports that I don't want to quit and give up. Then when I became a police officer, I didn't want to just be a police officer. I wanted to be the best. Um, I wanted to be a good one with good reputation. And you hear the people talk about the thin blue line, and sometimes uh, people are talking about the heroism of police officers. Well, I can also tell you, unfortunately, there's some cowards out there that wear the same uniform and carry the same badge and gun that I did. We got paid the same, but they were not the same police officer that I was. And so I'm like, yeah, the thin blue line is thin at times. And there would be guys that say, "Hey, man, I got your back." And you're like, okay. And you turn around and they got your back so far away, you can't even see them. And
Right.
so I wanted friends that I called foxhole friends, um, that could be in the foxhole with me. And I want to be that type of parent, for my kids, where no, not just talk about it, but I want to be there with them during a battle if I can. And when I started training as a sergeant, and when I started training at detectives, young detectives, and I'd have them one on one with me in the car, um, I said, look, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I don't have tons of friends at this department, but I don't need tons of friends. I only need a handful. And I said, this is how I determine who a good cop is. Um, if something bad were to happen to your family, and most of them had kids, young kids, and I said somebody was to take one of your kids hostage or kidnap them, and you had 24 hours to get them back alive and safe, but you could only pick 5 officers in this entire department to go with you to accomplish that mission. I said, I want to be one of the 5. And I want you to think about that, being one of the 5. And it's interesting because when I retired, a couple of guys told me, Baldwin, you would have been one of the 5.
Mm.
And that was all I needed to know. Because again, we're human beings as officers. We got all kinds of issues and problems. Some guys are lazy. Some guys have a good work ethic. And some guys are flat out scared. They won't admit it, but they are, to go down an alley or a bad neighborhood or knock on a drug den, basically, with pit bulls and stuff like that. But I was one of those guys that would do that. And I always had a handful of guys with me, especially the guy that I trained. Whether or not maybe he wanted to come along or not, he did, and showed enough courage and resilience. And we had success. And there's
Yeah.
a reason why then we made more arrests than anybody else. There's a reason then why the detective sergeants and lieutenants would give me the tough cases. And I'm like, I'm already buried. Why are you giving me this case? And they're like, well, Baldwin, because we know you'll get it done. And so, again, that goes back to reputation and what your name means to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there, going down, those dark alleys into a place with a ton of guys and a bunch of pit bulls? I mean, were there ever times that hair stood up on your back, that you had some fear going into it, and had to get through that?
I'd say a lot of times.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I've done some undercover work before, and you're scared, you're nervous. There have been times when I've been on a surveillance, by myself, and there's people walking around. A couple times there was guys leaning on my car, not knowing that I was inside the car doing surveillance on their drug house. And I'm like, you're in a very dangerous situation. But I was scared, but I had a healthy fear. I wasn't scared to do my job.
Mm.
And fear can paralyze people. There are leaders that all of a sudden, hey, they promote, they're a sergeant, they're a lieutenant, and then all of a sudden a school shooting or something big comes up, and you can just see the pucker factor, and they don't know what to do. Well, I didn't always make the right decision, but I did make a decision. We were going to do something. And so having a plan and executing that plan gave me confidence that I'm doing something. And it gave the guys around me confidence that we were doing something. But yeah, I think Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I did have guardian angels. I believed in that. Um, I find them right in that same passage. Goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life. Those were the names of my guardian angels, and helped me through my career.
Yeah. And and again, it reflects back to that, the open door to your career, and that you had faith to take that step. Not faith that it was going to work out, but you had faith enough to take a step into the unknown, and knowing that the Lord has got you. And here you are in your career, um, holding is true to that same faith. And man, I think it's awesome. But I have one more question within that your career, and that is, why do they call you the legend?
Uh, it was kind of a thing that kind of followed me throughout my career, and some people, uh, new guys, didn't even know my real name initially. They were just introduced in the hallway. Hey, there goes the legend. And I was thinking about to where that kind of started, and I think the origin was nothing historical or anything. It was a softball game, um, between the fire department and the police department. So it was the original Guns and Hoses softball
Yeah.
game. And maybe when I was getting introduced, and now coming up to bat, Mike the Legend Baldwin. But I did have a reputation of being a go getter. And part of that was I was trying to be the best. I was trying to make a name for myself and be the best officer out there. But what I did a little differently than most is I started talking to the bad guys, getting to know them. And when I got to know them, guess what they told me? They told me
Yeah.
about other bad guys. And so I started learning so much information about the streets, and I was making so many arrests that this persona of, hey, he's a legend, um, kind of followed me. And I don't want this to sound prideful, because it's easy to sound prideful. But I had asked some guys, friends of mine, when I, retired, I'm like, hey, this is what I was called. This was the nickname and stuff like that. When did you first hear it, and what did you think about it? And one guy said, hey, I could always go to you for help. And this was pretty important. This is one of those five guys type deal. He
Yeah.
said, you're the one guy I knew who would lay down his life to get me home to my children. And I'm like, that's pretty legendary. You think about that. Um, Another guy said, you always had a plan, and we were following you because we trusted you. And so that was reaffirming. And then another buddy said, you always did what was right, despite what everybody thought, including command staff. And you weren't a brown noser, and through it all, you were able to keep a life work balance. And so that's what made you the legend in my mind. But I've never really told these guys that they push me to get better.
Mm.
So, because there was a handful of officers and guys that I trained that were good, and I wanted to keep up with them, but I wanted to stay a step ahead of them. And so they pushed me. So they're partially responsible for, making the legend. And so guys like Brandon Lindsay and Mike Gregory, Jeremy Atwell, Jesse Galaz, these were guys that I trained. Adam Layton, Richard Yost, Joe Groover, um, Tyler Johnson, Devin Lejander, Lucas Jensen. These are the guys that were going to be in my group of five. Obviously, I named more than five guys, but they had different spans throughout the career. But at the
Yeah.
time, there was a handful of them that if I knew we were going to get into something bad and I needed to call a handful of guys, there was a couple that I could call and they would be there. And that's the same thing for me. They knew that I would come and put down whatever I had going on at the time to help them if they needed. And I wasn't playing around when I showed up on scene. I'm not a big guy, but we're going to make decisions. I believe, in knowing the law and what I'm able to do and not do. And so I think that scared some people because maybe they thought that I knew the law better than they did. And it wasn't anything like that, but it was kind of perfecting your craft. And the Bible
Yeah.
says, whatever thy hand findeth to do it with all your might. And so it doesn't matter what job you are. If you're a preacher, you should be the best preacher, possible for your congregation. if you're a school teacher, you should be the best, most prepared school teacher for your students. When God gave me that role of being a detective, I should be the best detective. And when I'm in that interview room, I need to elicit a confession from this guy so my victim can get justice. And so it was a challenge to me to always get better. And some bad guys made me better too because they were good at what they did. They were a good bad guy. And
Yeah.
I had to find creative ways to get them. But I had told a few of them, hey, we're going to play this game for 20 years. You might win the first 18, but I'm going to get you. And a couple of them have actually gone to prison since I've been here. Some of my buddies have called and said, hey, that guy you worked for all those years and stacking all those cases against him, finally, a judge sent him to prison. And it wasn't during my career, it's been after, but it was just kind of stacking the deck. So, anyway, I would encourage my kids to be like that. You know, you get paid to do a job, do it to the best of your ability, learn what you can in that role until God moves you on to another role. And then when you get there, be humble enough to learn how to do what it is that needs to be done and then work harder than everybody else.
Yeah, and that is great lesson for our boys, bringing them up. And I was wanting to ask you why reputation is so important. And it sounds like you covered it a bit. That these guys could trust you, that you're somebody that they could go to. You are somebody they can follow. Do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, it's just part of my value statements, you know. So if somebody said, "Hey, Baldwin, what are your value statements?" And I think each man should know what it is that he's fighting for, and he should have a small list of things in his mind that, yeah, these are things I'm not compromising on, and it's my belief in God, um, that He's my creator and reason for living. I value family, and I'm willing to fight and protect them. I value my reputation and what my name means to others. And I value faith, the idea and the concept of being faithful to my wife, faithful to work, faithful to God. Um, I value being tough and resilient. And doesn't mean everything's easy, but when you get knocked down, can you get back up? And I think that is what these guys at work probably respected the most because nobody wants to go to an internal affairs investigation. Um, you're compelled to answer the questions and you may or may not get fired or disciplined or whatever, but going through those and then you come back exonerated that, yeah, you did do the right thing for the right reason. And then my buddies are like, hey, why don't you sue them, for defamation of character or slander or whatever. And you know you paused today's show talking about 9/11, and 22 years ago today our country was attacked. And when that happened, America got back up. They got knocked down, got punched in the mouth that day, and it was sad and scary for a time. But a lot of men and women committed themselves to being a firefighter, a police officer, going in the military. People started praying, and America collectively got knocked down, but then stood back up. And we were probably as strong as ever 22 years ago. And since then, what has happened, the further you get away from it and the further you get removed from it, you start to forget and become desensitized. And it's like, I hate to see if we have to get smacked in the mouth again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Well, Mike, since a leaving the law enforcement, you have joined up, as you talked about, with Grossman On Truth, and which is with Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, who has written a number of books, and one of which is a required reading for the Army, if I'm correct in that. And he is the one who really coined in one of his books the sheepdog, and wolves. And so I'd just like you to talk a little bit about your experience with Grossman On Truth, and yeah, a little bit about sheep, wolves, and sheepdog. And I mean, it's obvious that you are a sheepdog, that that the people around you, you viewed as your flock that is worth protecting, and stood against a number of wolves.
Yeah, so I implemented this model in my own life without even knowing about Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. It just made sense to me. And I think this model makes sense to other people. There's three types of people in this world. There's primarily sheep, and that's most Americans. They're walking around living their lives with not a care in the world. You see them when you go to Walmart or Home Depot or whatever in the parking lot. They get out and their heads in their cell phone and they're texting away, walking up to the door. They have no situational awareness that somebody might be lurking out there seeking to do them harm. And if you're doing that, you need to wake up because we're starting to live in a pretty violent world and people are taking things that are not theirs and folks are being assaulted. But those are the sheep. And then there are the wolves, and the wolves are that just 1%, the sociopaths that want to prey on the sheep. They're just looking for an easy target, and um, they're basically a coward, for sure. And then there are the sheepdogs, and those are the first responders. Those are the men and women, your listeners, that are going, hey, I want to be the right type of parent. I want to look after my kids, take care of them, provide for them, teach them, train them. As a police officer and a first responder, I was that sheepdog. Most of the people, for example, at a football game, I would work security at the Arizona Cardinals Stadium, and there's 70,000 people in there. 65,000 plus are sheep. They could care less what's going on. They have no idea that somebody might be there to hurt them. There are police officers around trying to keep the peace, but certainly after 9/11, we've got these metal detectors and scanners and stuff like that because all it takes is one wolf to hurt a bunch of sheep. And so when this position opened up for Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, I met with him via a Zoom call, and then I flew here to where he's at, interviewed with him, and I helped rebrand his company. And he has these books. I call them the On series: on killing, on combat, on spiritual combat. I said, hey, let's use your name, Grossman, and what you're giving out to people is truth. Let's call it Grossman On Truth. And he liked that. We built a website, put together a nice professional logo, started selling some merchandise, some T-shirts, that say "Hunt the wolf, protect the flock," that type of thing, or a verse from Isaiah 6:8, where it says, "Whom shall I send?" And hey, send me. I want to be that guy. That's the sheepdog model. Um, Fathers should be the sheepdog for their family. And it's not that you always have to be mean and tough and stuff, even though, I have that demeanor with my bald head and whatever. Some people, oh, he's mean. The sheep sometimes don't like the sheepdog because he looks a little like the wolf. Sometimes he has to bar his teeth. And it's a little bit scary. Like when I would go to arrest somebody who didn't want to get arrested, it did look violent. But violence, swiftness of action, overwhelming force, that's how you get someone into custody safely. And so that's what we did. And that's basically the sheepdog model in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Um, so we have about 10 minutes here before we're pushing up on an hour.
Okay.
But I would love to love to talk a little bit about your family and your role there. Um, and, and specifically I would like to know what you would, challenge the listeners as a parent, boys. Like, what are some things that we should be thinking about? What are the things that our boys need to know? How do we want to raise them? Um, yeah.
When people ask you about your family and advice that you would give, it's a scary thing. It's a humbling thing because then you're like, am I practicing what I preach? And
Sure.
so, as a father, um, I haven't been perfect, but my wife and I have been married for 29 years. So I think that longevity and that consistency, showing them, my kids by example, that, hey, I love your mother. I'm willing to take care of your mom and protect her. I think that's huge. I respect her. Um, my son, he got to hear some of the stories that I would come home with, complaining about some of the internal complications of the police department. I wish maybe I would have kept some of those to myself and he didn't have to hear all those things. Um, whether or not he digested them or not, I'm not sure, but living the right example for him. So, work ethic, I mean, I answered the bell every single day. I didn't call in sick. It had to be very rare. um, Packed my lunch every day. I describe myself kind of like a blue collar worker. So I answered the bell. Um, and so I would say the same thing for him. Be consistent, have a strong work ethic. That's huge. Um, my son and daughter both, they're twins. They played sports, junior high and high school. And um, I probably could have been a better supporter at the games than I was. I was competitive. Sometimes I was frustrated because of my coaching experience in the past. I thought there was a better way to do certain things, but isn't that how it always is? The parents in the stands seem to know better than all the coaches and the referees. Um, but I probably should have kept my mouth shut a little bit more there and been a little bit more patient. But what I want my kids to know most of all, is that I have a relationship with my Heavenly Father, and I pray and ask God for His direction and wisdom. I want them to do the same. I also want them to come to me because I've laid out a blueprint that, hey, Dad's willing to do the right thing for the right reasons. Um, he's not going anywhere. He's faithful. Um, and they haven't seen, a broken home. And I don't want them, to start their career having a broken home or something like that. And so it's a legacy. It's an example to follow. And sometimes you learn, from the good and the bad. And so they can take both of that from me. I don't want them to repeat any of my mistakes. Um, and certainly as a parent, that's always our fear, because we love our kids so much. And it's that helicopter parent. And, oh, we can't get him hurt. He needs to wear a helmet and elbow pads and knee pads and all this stuff. I mean, how did we survive as kids?
Yeah.
It's truly amazing. But as my kids get older and they become adults, which they are now, I'm not as close, physically as I would like to be. They're in a different state, but I have to let them know via text, occasional phone call that, hey, I'm here if you ever need me. I'm praying for you today. I know you got something big coming up. Um, but I'd be willing to hop on a plane, you know, this afternoon if I had to help them. And so I want them to be able to come back to me for help, come back to my wife for help and advice if they ever need it. Um, hopefully, we can be calm and rational about things and not judgmental, because they're going to make some mistakes throughout their career. It's called life. And none of us have done this perfect. There's only one, and
Yes.
we're not him.
Yeah. Well, Mike Baldwin, thank you so much for your time. It really has been a pleasure. I have things swirling in my mind that could last up to 3 hours, but I'm not going to do do that to you today, sir. I appreciate you.
No, we don't want to bore the listeners. They can only handle so much, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm not ashamed of Jesus Christ, and I like to have the opportunity to share my faith with others. And if I could be a help to someone along the way, that's what I want. And so thank you for this platform today.
Yeah, you betcha. And Mike, is there anything that you feel has been left on the table that you would, you know, that you'd like to share?
No, I think well, maybe I would say this: if there's anybody out that can gain any part or something from my story, it would be you're not. It's never too late to make a change. If there's something that you need to do in your life to make a change for the better, stop beating yourself up about it and get on the horse and let's go. Um, let's make positive changes today. Don't compound it by living in the past. That's what I would tell them.
Right on. Well, brother in Christ, thank you, sir.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.